Welcome back, my friends. Today we are diving into methods to make you unbreakable against women. The strongest men in history were not those who conquered armies, but those who conquered their own desires. Think about that for a moment. Imagine standing in a palace, marble pillars towering above you, gold ornaments glittering in torchlight. The emperor's lover walks past, known for her beauty, for her cunning, for her ability to bend men to her will. And yet she cannot break his composure. His gaze does not falter. His breathing does not change. He remains unmoved, as if her presence were nothing more than smoke drifting through the hall. What did these men know that we've forgotten? What secret strength made them immune to the very temptations that brought others to ruin? Tonight, you will learn the forbidden Stoic secrets that made emperors, generals and philosophers unbreakable against the most dangerous tests of all, the subtle manipulations of desire, seduction, and betrayal. These are not stories of men who hid in ivory towers writing gentle poems. These are stories of men who ruled, fought, and endured, while the world around them burned with chaos and treachery. Stoicism was not a dry philosophy to be studied by scholars. It was a weapon, a shield forged in the fire of war and betrayal, polished in the courts of intrigue, and sharpened in the silent chambers of temptation. The men who lived by its principles did so not for comfort, but for survival. Because in their world, to be broken by passion or to be owned by desire meant the loss of power, the loss of freedom, and in many cases, the loss of life itself. These secrets were whispered among emperors who faced conspiracies in their own bedrooms, among generals whose wives and mistresses were courted by enemies, eager to twist loyalty into treason, among philosophers who walked through the markets of Rome, mocked and tempted, yet never once bowed their heads in shame. And while the centuries have passed, the truth has not changed. The methods they practiced, the rituals they performed, and the discipline they wielded remain as deadly effective today as they were 2,000 years ago. In this video, you will uncover 7 rarely revealed practices, principles so brutal, so uncompromising, that they carved into men a strength no woman, no betrayal, no temptation could break. These were not gentle affirmations. They were cold disciplines, designed to strip away weakness and reveal the core of a man who could not be manipulated. You will hear of the emperor who trained his gaze to see the soul rather than the skin, of the general who prepared daily for betrayal so that not even his wife's treachery could move him, of the philosopher who, as a slave, laughed in the face of mockery and later counseled the very people who once humiliated him, of the soldier who endured public shame in silence, and in that silence found more power than any words could ever give. Each of these lessons comes from the crucible of history. They are not theories. They were tested by men who faced the sharpest daggers and the cruelest temptations. By the end of this journey, you will not simply know what Stoicism is, you will hold in your hands the very tactics that made the greatest men in history mentally unbreakable. So ask yourself, are you ready to stand where they stood? To face the same fire and come out forged into something harder than iron? Then listen closely, because the 7 brutal Stoic secrets are about to be revealed. In the private chambers of Marcus Aurelius, the night was never without tests. Behind the polished marble doors, servants whispered, and messengers slipped in with subtle agendas. Among them were courtesans, women chosen for their beauty and sent to tempt the emperor into weakness. They were not gifts of pleasure. They were weapons, sharpened by rivals who understood that the fall of a man often begins with his gaze. Marcus Aurelius did not shield himself from these trials. Instead, he confronted them with discipline that few could imagine. He trained his eyes never to linger. A fleeting glance could become a chain, a spark that grew into fire. To him, desire was not passion. Desire was enslavement, the beginning of a ruler's decline. He believed the battle for mastery did not start on the battlefield or in the Senate chamber. It began with perception, in the simple act of looking. If you allowed your eyes to be pulled, you had already surrendered ground. The man who could not control his gaze could not control his life. Modern men think they are immune to this test, yet they are surrounded by it constantly. The glow of a screen filled with images designed to seize attention. The lingering glance at beauty in the office, on the street, or across a crowded room. Each moment of weakness is a thread, and enough threads woven together will bind a man in chains. Marcus understood what many forget. To be unbreakable, you must master the smallest of choices. The first step before desire takes root. He did not avoid women, nor did he fear them. He simply saw through the surface. He looked upon people not as flesh meant to seduce, but as souls bound by the same mortality and flaws as himself. There was a ritual he practiced in silence every morning. Before the sun rose, before Rome stirred awake, he would sit alone and remind himself, see the soul, not the skin. This vow was not a whisper of morality, but a declaration of power. For the man who sees beyond the surface can never be owned by it. The emperor's gaze was more than discipline. It was armor, an unbreakable shield against the most ancient form of manipulation, and that is the first secret. If you can master your eyes, you will master yourself. In the annals of Rome, there is a story of a decorated general, a man who had led legions across the frontiers and returned victorious. Yet the most dangerous battle he ever faced was not against barbarians or rival armies. It was within his own household. Whispers reached him that his wife, a woman of noble birth, had been conspiring with his political rivals. Not only her affection, but her loyalty had shifted into betrayal. For most men, such news would unleash fury. Rage, humiliation, and the thirst for revenge would consume them. Many leaders before him had executed wives, lovers, even friends for less. But this general did something different. He had prepared for this moment long before it arrived. Each morning, before donning his armor, he practiced what the Stoics called premeditation malorum, the premeditation of evils. He imagined betrayal as inevitable. He pictured his closest allies abandoning him, his family turning against him, his soldiers failing him. By rehearsing these calamities in his mind, he stripped them of their power. When they happened, they no longer shocked him. So when the whispers became proof, he felt no tremor of surprise, no tightening of the chest, no consuming fire of vengeance. Instead, he regarded the betrayal as nature itself, as common as a storm breaking across the sea. To expect loyalty without fail, he believed, was to live in a fantasy. To expect betrayal was to live in truth. This mindset turned his enemy's weapon into dust. The plot they believed would unmake him did nothing. In fact, he went further. He confronted the rival who had gained his wife's favor, not with wrath but with composure. And in an act that stunned the Senate, he promoted the man to higher office. It was not weakness. It was dominance. For in that moment, he showed that no insult, no conspiracy, no theft of affection could disturb his reason. He ruled not by force of passion, but by mastery of self. His enemies gained nothing, and his legend grew greater because of it. This is the second secret. Expect betrayal as natural, and it will never own you. In your own life, whether from friends, family, or women, betrayal loses its sting when you have already rehearsed it in the mind. Emotional immunity makes you untouchable. The general's legacy endures for one reason. When others sought to wound him through his heart, he proved that his heart was beyond their reach. Among the most famous Stoics of Rome was a man who began life not in wealth or honor, but in chains. His name was Epictetus. He was born a slave, treated as property, subjected to the cruelty of his master, and yet, from this lowly station, he rose to a level of authority that even free men envied. One story tells of his humiliation in the presence of noble guests. His master, eager to entertain, mocked him openly, forcing him to perform degrading tasks and endure ridicule. Among the spectators were women of the court, who laughed at his condition, jeering at his weakness. For most men, such shame would cut deeper than any blade. Anger, desperation, or despair would spill out uncontrollably. But Epictetus did not flinch. Instead, he stood in calm silence. His mind was untouched. He once said, "You may insult my body, but you cannot touch my reason." The body could be chained. The reputation could be dragged through the mud. But the inner fortress of thought, that domain remained sovereign. This was the core of his philosophy. True power is not measured by possessions, approval, or reputation. It is measured by the mastery of one's own mind. For while fortune can strip away status, wealth, or even freedom, it cannot touch the reasoning faculty unless you surrender it willingly. This truth makes a man invincible. Because if your worth is not tied to the praise of others, then insults carry no weight. If your identity is not built on possessions, then loss cannot destroy you. If your peace is not dependent on another's affection, then rejection cannot move you. In modern life, this remains the most brutal test. Insults, rejection, and the subtle games played to provoke emotion are constant. Many men crumble when mocked, or when a woman withholds approval. They lash out, they beg, or they retreat into self-doubt. But the man who understands Epictetus's lesson remains untouchable. He knows that his value is not something given by others, and therefore cannot be taken away by others. Epictetus endured slavery, scorn, and humiliation, yet never surrendered his calm. And when he was finally freed, something remarkable happened. The same society that once laughed at him now sought his wisdom. Women of Rome, who had once ridiculed the slave, later came quietly to his lectures, seeking counsel on how to endure their own trials. The man who began life with nothing ended with influence greater than kings, not because of what he owned, but because of what he could never lose, the mastery of his own mind. That is the third secret. A man who builds his self-worth on the unshakable foundation of reason is a man who can never be owned. In the heart of Rome, influence often came not only through the Senate floor or the battlefield, but through the chambers of desire. One senator, admired for his clarity of judgment, faced a temptation that few men could resist. A widow of immense wealth and renown set her sights on him. She was not only beautiful but also powerful, her late husband having left her estates, servants, and a network of allies eager to maintain her favor. Many men competed for her attention, each hoping to secure her fortune and the influence that accompanied her hand. She approached the senator with an offer that seemed impossible to refuse. Riches beyond measure, estates that could guarantee his children's prosperity, influence in the Senate through her allies, and companionship with a woman whose beauty was spoken of in whispers. Most men would have seen this as fortune smiling upon them. Most men would have surrendered, but this senator understood something deeper. He saw what others did not. Her offer was not freedom, but a chain. For the man who needs another's wealth, another's beauty, or another's influence no longer rules himself. He is ruled by what he craves. The senator's response was short but unforgettable. To need her is to be owned by her. With those words, he declined her hand. No hesitation, no apology, no elaborate excuse. Just the clarity of a man unwilling to trade freedom for comfort. The widow was astonished. Accustomed to bending men with her offers, she turned her attention to others. And indeed other men fell. One senator accepted her wealth and soon found himself a puppet, his every vote in the Senate dictated by her will. Another sought her beauty, and when she withdrew her affection, he crumbled in disgrace. She destroyed them not with daggers or poison, but with chains of desire. The man who walked away remained unbroken. His independence became a legend, whispered as both a warning and a lesson. While others gained temporary pleasure and quick ruin, he preserved something far more valuable: sovereignty over himself. The Stoic principle here is brutal in its simplicity. Freedom means desiring nothing that enslaves you. It is not wealth itself that corrupts, nor beauty, nor influence, but the need for them. Once you believe you cannot live without these things, you have already surrendered your will. In modern life, the trap is no less common. Many men trade their freedom for transactional relationships, where wealth and beauty become bargaining chips. They accept terms that bind them, mistaking golden chains for fortune. Yet chains are chains no matter how they glitter. The senator's refusal remains the lesson. To be unbreakable, you must walk away from anything that seeks to own you, no matter how tempting it appears. For what is gained in dependence will always cost more than it is worth. That is the fourth secret. The man who needs nothing cannot be owned by anyone. There is a tale from the late days of the Roman Republic, when intrigue flowed more freely than wine. A philosopher of great renown was invited to a banquet hosted by a woman whose beauty was matched only by her reputation for manipulation. She was known to ensnare men of power, drawing secrets from them under the influence of desire, and then using those secrets as weapons. At the feast, she presented the philosopher with a jeweled goblet of wine. The aroma was sweet, the color deep, but the cup was laced with herbs said to cloud the mind and inflame the body. It was not meant to honor him, but to bind him. Once weakened by passion, he could be blackmailed, controlled, even ruined. Most men in his position would have accepted without question. To refuse a drink in such company was an insult. To deny her was to risk offense, and perhaps even political retaliation. Yet the philosopher knew the truth. Pleasure that costs freedom is poison. He held the cup in his hand, studied it, and smiled politely. Instead of drinking, he set it aside. He asked for water, clear and untainted, and lifted it in a quiet toast. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke louder than any speech. He chose clarity over indulgence, freedom over desire, discipline over weakness. The hall fell into silence. The seductress's weapon had failed. Her scheme collapsed, not because of confrontation, but because the man she sought to trap refused to play the game at all. By denying the poisoned cup, he denied her power. This is the essence of Stoic wisdom. Not all pleasures are gifts. Many are traps, designed to enslave the will and bend the spirit. What appears sweet on the surface may carry within it chains that bind you tighter than iron. The modern world offers its own poisoned cups. They come not only in the form of lust, but in endless digital distractions, hollow indulgences and fleeting pleasures that steal hours, weaken focus, and erode resolve. Each one promises delight, but the cost is freedom. The man who accepts without discipline becomes dependent, ruled by cravings rather than reason. The philosopher's lesson is timeless. To remain unbreakable, you must examine every pleasure with suspicion. Ask not only what it offers, but what it demands in return. If it demands your freedom, your focus, or your self-respect, then it is no gift at all. It is poison. That night the philosopher left the banquet untouched, his reputation intact, his will unbroken. The seductress turned her schemes on others, and lesser men fell. But his quiet act of rebellion, raising a simple cup of water, became legend. That is the fifth secret. The man who refuses the poisoned cup can never be mastered. In the dusty camps along the Roman frontier, soldiers were tested not only by the sword, but by the eyes of those who watched them. Among these warriors was a centurion known for his iron discipline. He had marched through snow, fought through ambushes, and carried the scars of countless campaigns. Yet his greatest trial came not on the battlefield, but in the heart of Rome. Word spread quickly through the capital. His wife, a woman of high birth, was seen in the arms of another man. The whispers grew into open mockery. Rivals expected him to lash out with violence, to challenge the offender, to stain the streets with blood. Others expected him to crumble, humiliated before his men. A lesser soldier might have done both, but this centurion did neither. He showed no anger, no visible wound. He did not confront his wife in public, nor raise his voice in private. He spoke nothing of it at all. Instead, he carried on his duties with the same precision as before, drilling his soldiers, leading his marches, enforcing order. His silence unsettled everyone. The enemy could not provoke him. The gossipers could not shake him. The more they sought a reaction, the more his composure revealed their weakness. This was not passivity. it was strategy. He understood the Stoic principle that silence is a weapon. To rage, to argue, or to plead would have surrendered power to those who sought to break him. Indifference was stronger than confrontation, for it starved manipulation at its root. In modern life, the same truth holds. Many attempt to provoke men into emotional outbursts. Through insults, rejection, or public humiliation, the man who reacts gives away his strength, showing that his state of mind belongs to others. But the man who remains silent, who shows indifference, cannot be controlled. He starves the fire of attention until it dies on its own. The centurion's silence grew louder than any words could. His enemies could not twist his image into one of a jealous fool. His soldiers, seeing his unshaken demeanor, respected him more. Even the Senate, hearing of his restraint, elevated him further, for they trusted a man who could not be baited by scandal. And as for the accuser, the man who flaunted the affair, his name soon faded into shame. Without reaction to fuel his triumph, he became nothing more than a shadow of gossip, forgotten as quickly as he rose. The lesson is clear. Silence is not weakness. It is mastery. The unbreakable man does not need to defend his pride with words or violence. His composure speaks louder than any reply. That is the sixth secret. The man who governs his tongue and his temper rules not only himself but all who seek to provoke him. There is an account of a philosopher whose wife passed away after many years at his side. She was admired in the city, loved by her household, and her funeral was attended by crowds who came to mourn. The air was thick with incense, the sound of weeping echoed through the streets, and her body was carried with solemnity to its resting place. Among those gathered, all eyes turned to her husband. They expected him to collapse in grief, to weep as others wept, to show the same raw emotion that death forces upon even the strongest. But he did none of these things. He stood calm, his face composed, his gaze steady. He neither tore his garments in anguish, nor shed a single tear. His composure unsettled the mourners, who whispered that his heart must be made of stone. One man confronted him openly, mocking him before the crowd. "Do you feel nothing? Was she nothing to you, that you stand as if you have lost no one at all?" The philosopher's reply was simple, but it carried the weight of centuries. Death is not cruelty, but nature's order. To resist is to defy reason. He explained that grief is not owed to death, for death is no injustice. It is the destiny of all men and women, the cycle of nature itself. To rage against it is as futile as raging against the setting sun. Tears do not change the order of the universe. Reason demands acceptance, for what cannot be altered must be embraced. The Stoic principle is clear. To accept nature is to master suffering. Even the loss of love is not tragedy but training. Each heartbreak is an opportunity to strengthen the mind against what is inevitable. To cling desperately to what must pass is to guarantee endless torment. To accept with calm is to become indestructible. Modern men face this trial in different forms. The end of a relationship, betrayal, abandonment, heartbreak. Each feels like death and each tempts men to collapse in grief. But the philosopher's example reveals the path of mastery. Do not curse nature for taking what was never yours to keep. Stand firm, let reason guide you, and move forward unbroken. When the final rites were finished, the philosopher did something that chilled those who witnessed it. As the mourners sobbed and the air was filled with lamentation, he turned from the graveside and walked away with head unbowed, steps steady and spirit unshaken. Where others dissolved into sorrow, he carried himself like stone, a living reminder that no power in the world, not even death, could bend his reason. That is the seventh secret. Acceptance is not indifference, it is power. The man who accepts all that nature brings cannot be destroyed by loss, for nothing can take away his mastery of himself. The lessons are now before you: the emperor's gaze, the betrayed general, the slave who owned his masters, the widow's trap, the poisoned cup, the soldier of silence, and the philosopher's funeral. 7 brutal secrets, each forged by men who refused to be broken. These were not abstract ideas or comfortable teachings. They were weapons sharpened by necessity, proven in the harshest trials of life. Men who ruled empires, commanded armies, and endured humiliation carried these principles as their shield. They stood unmovable, even when beauty, betrayal, temptation, and death itself tried to break them. And you too can carry them. Implementing even one will separate you from the ordinary. Because most men surrender their minds at the first test. They let their gaze be captured, their emotions be provoked, their desires be chained, their grief consume them. But the man who takes these secrets into himself walks another path. He is no longer ruled by what he cannot control. He rules himself, and that is the highest form of power. So let this be your final strike of the night. Start tomorrow. Do not let your eyes, your heart, or your silence be controlled by another. That is the first step to becoming unbreakable. Begin with the first secret. Tomorrow morning, practice the Emperor's gaze. Notice where your eyes wander and take back control. Train your perception, and you will discover that the first battle is already won. And if you are ready for more, subscribe now. This is only the beginning. There are countless forbidden Stoic secrets waiting to be revealed. Secrets that will arm you with the same strength that once shaped emperors, generals, and philosophers. Stay vigilant. Stay disciplined. Stay unbreakable.